Hello, hi, and welcome to another episode of Wellness in the Workplace. My name is Mbali Mzinyane, and I am your host. Wellness in the Workplace is a podcast that aims to equip new and experienced professionals with the tools and insights to navigate challenging workplace dynamics. And in today's episode, we are reimagining and rehumanizing the workplace with Dr. Ngao Motsei. Dr. Ngao Motsei is a workplace bullying practitioner. She is a coach. She's a scholar and an all-round thought leader in her field of work. Welcome to Wellness in the Workplace.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for being here today. Thank you for your time. I know you are very busy, so I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. And like I said, in today's episode, we are really just unpacking some of the work that, you do around workplace bullying. We're unpacking what actually it means to rehumanize the workplace. But before diving into our topic, can you tell us a bit more about some of the work that you are doing in workplace bullying, and also how did you start specializing in that area?
Yeah. Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity. I never, even if I may be how busy, but I never give up an opportunity to talk about bullying because it's a very, very important subject. We don't talk about it enough. And there is also too much suffering in the workplace, and which essentially is why I do what I do, is rehumanizing. What I call my big, hairy, audacious goal is to bring back humanity into organizations. And why and how I got into this work is that I was bullied myself, and I was not even aware that what was happening at the time was bullying. And I mean, I'm an African. I'm a storyteller, so most of my answers are going to be in stories.
Yes, let's go into it.
So I'm starting at the back end of your question, how I got into this work, and then I'll end up with how I do that and how I partner with organizations. So after a particularly bad day. One Friday, I was driving home, and thanks for Google, I got home and I typed something, whatever it is, I typed into my computer, and boom, this thing has a name. It's called workplace bullying. And my first reaction was, no, I cannot be bullied, because we tend to think of people that are bullied as people that are weak, as people that can't, to speak for themselves. Now, I'm many things, but not to talk up for myself is not one of them.
Yes.
And fast forward, I actually, my attitude in life, and especially in corporate South Africa can be very tough.
Extremely.
When that happened, my first reaction was, well, what is the lesson here for me? And the lesson, like anybody, I was young at the time and with ambitions of climbing the corporate ladder.
Yes.
The lesson for me was, this is not how I want to lead. This is not how, when I become a leader, I want to lead.
How long ago was this?
If
you were to put timelines.
Some 10... about 8 years ago.
Okay.
8 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's how I got into it. I got interested and I, at that point, I made a decision for myself that this is not, if I can help it, and when I get into that big corner office, this is not how I'm going to lead. And of course, and at the time I was contemplating doing my PhD, and in fact I did a whole PhD on workplace bullying. But I decided, because I realized in my initial review of the literature that, especially in South Africa, there wasn't a lot of it, and a lot of it was done looked as an interpersonal issue. So I wanted to look at it from an organizational point of view. So my whole work and research was around how organizational factors that make bullying likely and make bullying rife. So that's
one part.
long story as to how I got into it.
Yes.
So how I work, and the work that I'm doing currently, how I partner with organizations, and typically organizations somehow find me, and it would start with reports in the hotlines, about anonymous hotlines. There's some bullying and this and that or the other. So basically, how I work is in 3 main categories.
Okay.
So there's a big chunk that I dedicate to awareness raising.
Gotcha.
Because we still do not know too much about what workplace bullying is and what it is not. So I run webinars and workshops, one with staff, employees, and a separate one with leaders. And with employees is around looking into what workplace bullying is and what is not. Because sometimes we make a decision when managers actually manage you as they should, we tend then to say, oh, they're bullying me. So I also touch on things like what is reasonable management actions, which is performance. But my whole thing really is that as leaders in organization, you have to manage performance and conduct. There's a way you can manage conduct. You can manage, and you should, as a manager, manage performance, but it's the how
you do it,
you do that. So that's the one part. And the webinars or workshops I do with leaders is really, I speak to leaders about their responsibility and the role they play in either cultivating a bullying culture or a healthy culture. And then the last bit, I actually work with, I coach and work with people that have been accused of bullying. And this is
some rehabilitation.
This often raises eyes because, we tend, most of the support and the attention goes to people that are targets of bullying.
The victims.
But my reason for working with people that have been accused of bullying is that we cannot solve the problem if we do not engage and understand and work with people that have been accused of bullying. You also notice that I refer to them as people that have been accused, because my starting point is actually, I call them abrasive leaders.
Abrasive leaders, okay.
Because abrasive or abrasion is a behavior. And a behavior you can work with, you can change. But a bully is an identity. When you say somebody is a bully, that's their identity, and your identity is your identity. So I start by making those distinctions, nuances and distinctions. And I find also that it helps to be able to have meaningful conversations. Because you can imagine how difficult it is.
To also just accept that you are being labeled as a bully. Exactly. Especially if you're not aware of it, right?
Especially if you're not. That's a very important point that you're raising, because I find that many of the abrasive leaders I work with are not aware about the impact, how they behave, the way they show up, and the way they lead or manage. Many are not aware, and many. The first thing is almost always the first reaction is, I'm not a bully. I'm just a hard manager. I'm a tough manager. I manage performance. And I say, well, that's very good. You should. But it's in the how you do that. You can be a tough manager, but not leave people broken.
Oh, okay. I've got so many questions that I just want to follow up on with everything that you've just said. But I think for the purposes of the discussion and just to set a bit more context, you said that, when you do consult with organizations, you always make sure you define what is workplace bullying and what it isn't.
Yeah.
So for this discussion, do you mind maybe just giving us an overview of what it is and what it isn't? And then we can just follow up with the discussion from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are specific behaviors that whether you look at across the literature, across all the research all over the world, there are specific key features of bullying. And in one of I have actually read a recent book, and is a South African woman I'm working and collaborating with. There are different ways and types of bullying. There's corporate bullying, for example. There's people refer to it as corporate bullying, but it means specific things. Corporate bullying, there's institutional bullying, there's mobbing or group bullying.
Yes, workplace mobbing,
So those are the ways in which bullying is and manifests. So in corporate bullying, essentially is when the top leader himself or herself is a bully. In other words, the abrasive nature of their leadership, the way they get results, and corporate bullying really means that when the biggest boss, the top boss, behaves in the way that it's demeaning, those are some of the behaviors. Belittling, publicly belittling people, shouting, screaming, never taking responsibility for blaming, all the time. And sometimes part of the behavior is, I give you targets, but I don't give you the tools to actually the support that you require. And the key feature is consistency. You do that consistently. Because when that behavior over time, you begin to pick up the patterns. This is how this thing actually happens.
Yeah.
Other ways of bullying is you can use, for example, internal processes. And systems within organizations. For example, I give you something to do which you believe that is unreasonable, and when you come back to me and say, "But boss, explain to me how this might work. I'm not clear on this." Instead of explaining, I threaten you with insubordination. For example, or I threaten you with, legal processes, sanctions, and bringing. So this is how some of the examples of what is generally, believed to be bullying behavior.
And what is it not?
What it is not is when you are not performing, and when your manager then says, based on the contract, what we contracted around in terms of your milestones, your objectives, and you're not performing with all the support that you have been provided, and then use that as an excuse, hide your non-performance as being bullied. So those are it's very nuanced sometimes, and there's a fine line. So, but you can, in terms of what it is not, is there is unreasonableness in the bullying, and also sometimes some of the behavior is really belittling, being belittled in public, being shouted at in public, humiliated, almost like you don't have a mind, can't you stupid, those kinds of things.
Okay. And I mean, based on the research that you've done and some of your experience, why is it so rife in the workplace at an organizational level?
Yeah. So there are different reasons why it is rife. I think from part of what I'm hearing from when working with people in organizations and from the research I've done and continue to do is that we still don't speak out. And people that are targets, again, language is very important for me. I don't call victims, I call them targets.
Okay.
Targets of bullying. Most don't speak about it because if they do, it actually deepens. It escalates. There's a risk of the abrasive leader, the bully, actually intensifying the bullying. So it becomes even much more unbearable.
Sure.
The second one is what I'm finding is that in instances where the bullying is reported, nothing gets done about it. This is why these are some of the things that I address when I run webinars or workshops and with leaders. And my famous saying is silence is complicit.
Sure.
You're being complicit.
That's true.
If you as leaders, when bullying is reported, you do nothing about it, you are indirectly saying it's okay to do that. So that's the one thing. The other thing is that organizations don't know, actually, many don't know what bullying is and what it is not, and they don't know how to deal with it when people report bullying. So many organizations at this point do not have bullying policies, for example. But I think that might also change a little bit with the passing of the Code of Good Practice into legislation. And it's a good start. It's not enough, but it's a good start, which means that organizations can then, take that as a start to start to define, to look at, for example, having bullying policies and behaving and defining what bullying is and so on and so forth. And the other, the last reason why it's rife and it continues to go, at least from a target point of view, I'm finding that for many, it's an economic reason.
Definitely.
I'm scared of being fired.
Because my livelihood depends on this job.
My livelihood depends on this, and the economic environment is quite tough now. So if I lose my job, so basically many people suck it up.
Sure.
And die internally and inside. There's a lot of suffering in organizations.
But then how do we empower, people who are in such disempowered positions? Because I do think that there's a responsibility at an organizational level that has to be there, that has to be enforced to make sure that, we create spaces that are safe enough for targets of bullying, to be able to engage in open, honest and transparent ways. Because ultimately, if this is left unaddressed, it leads to unproductivity, it leads to disengagement, and ultimately, I guess, the profitability of an organization. So how do we empower those who are disempowered?
I part of what I do, my line, I don't know what you call it, I call it, the work that I do, rehumanizing the workplace one leader at a time.
One leader at a time.
Yes. So my whole thing is that if you get it right at the leadership level, then you get it right in the organizations, because it starts with the leaders. The behavior they emulate, what they pay attention to, ultimately cascades throughout the organization. So one of the things that to answer your question, what can be done is it starts with leaders. First and foremost, leaders have got to communicate a zero tolerance to bullying, and part of it might be, this is what behavior we're not going to accept here. And the first thing is to start by talking about it, aligning it to the culture, because it's all really about the culture.
Yeah.
This is the kind of culture this is the kind of environment we want to create, an environment where everybody is free to speak up, free from bullying, but then start by defining what bullying is, what bullying is not. And then, of course, the other thing that organizations can do is develop. I spoke up earlier about developing policies, developing bullying specific policies which outline the behavior, what type of behavior bullying is, and also outlining the processes and procedures to follow to report the bullying. And then, of course, the other thing is, for management, for leadership to actually emulate the behavior that they want to see in organizations. That's the one thing. And actually to take it seriously when people report it and do something about it, even if it's just going back to people, to reporting, to say this is where we are, and in terms of your reporting. And then the other is through training, exposure. I usually, in some of the work that I do, I work about anti-bullying champions.
Okay.
Identifying anti-bullying champions and essentially training. And I usually work with those champions, how to handle bullying and how to handle the reporting and how to engage and specific things and interventions that I do. But at the individual level, I often also speak about people that suspect being bullied. It starts with some of the simple things that people can do is actually write down. Have an account of what is going on. What happened when and an account, a full account of what it is, how long it's been going, and so you might just need that. So keep record, a paper trail of what is happening, describing exactly what it is happening.
Sure. Okay. You touched on leadership and the role that they play in driving organizational culture. And in some of your work, you have a philosophy called the leadership shadow. So what exactly is that, and how does it help in fostering a healthy and bully-free work environment?
So I love the question of leadership shadow. So that's also one of the focus of what I do when I work with leaders. So my starting point really is that organizations are shadows of leaders. And that's the good news and the bad news. The good news is if you are aware as a leader that you cast a shadow, then you begin to be intentional about what you do.
Sure.
The bad news is if you're not aware that the way you behave, the way you lead casts a shadow, and if it's a bad shadow, a negative shadow, that's the bad news. So then what is a leadership shadow? It really consists of 4 elements, components. It's really about what a leader says, how a leader acts, what a leader prioritizes, and what a leader measures. If those 4 elements are congruent, that's your leadership shadow. So the point is as leaders is to be aware of the shadow that you cast. In other words, simply what it means is what I say, is it in alignment, congruent with my actions, my behavior as a leader? Is it congruent or in alignment with what I prioritize? And is it congruent with our measure?
Sure.
And so when I work with leaders around leadership shadow, is essentially the goal is for them to be aware.
Yeah, a lot of self-awareness.
A lot of self-awareness. It's for them to be aware and to actually be aware where there is incongruence between among these elements, how I act, how I behave, and so on and so forth. So that is what leadership shadow is. And to give you a practical example, using my leadership shadow, starting with what I say. What I say is that work doesn't have to be painful. Obviously, there's a whole lot more information because I usually run a whole day thing on leadership shadow. So I'm going to try to give
Summarize.
you snippets in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So the context and what I say always is work doesn't have to be painful. And how I behave is that I try to emulate always how a leader should behave with people that I work with, with my own behavior. Is I it's about leading with care, leading with compassion, and even in my being hard, because I think you know me.
I've received that hardness in a different context.
in a different context. But there's always consistency and fairness, and it's never even about a person. It's about the behavior and the principle and the behavior. So that's that. And what I prioritize is working with leaders that actually have got an interest to create healthy work environments. What I prioritize is never letting go of an opportunity such as this. The platform, your platform, is a very important platform because that's also part of awareness raising. Any opportunity I get to speak about bullying, to speak about the importance of leading with care, to speak about creating healthy and respectful environment, I always prioritize. And what I measure as the last point is even my own leadership shadow. Getting feedback on my own leadership shadow, whether I am living what I'm preaching. So that's in a very nutshell what the leadership shadow is, but essentially is about, at the core of it, is what do you stand for as a leader? And whatever it is that you stand for is what you say, your actions, what you prioritize, and what you measure. Is it congruent with whatever it is that you stand for? I stand for justice in organizations, and I stand for a respectful environment and respect that dignity of every individual, every employee in the organization, and that's what I try to do. And that's what I try to emulate, and that's what the leadership shadow is about.
Okay. Is there room to hold our leaders accountable in organizations?
There is room to hold our leaders accountable. We don't do it, and again, for different reasons. Some of the reasons that I mentioned, but I think we can do that by creating a feedback culture.
Okay.
A culture of feedback, where feedback is not just one directional from the leaders downwards to the organization, but where anybody in the organization, even the most junior person, can give feedback to me as a leader, for example. And but in order to do that, to build that, you have to build a culture of feedback, because feedback, everybody believes that they can give feedback, but it's not the easiest thing to do. So it's about also empowering and working with people, empowering them to be able to give proper constructive
Yes.
feedback in the moment
Yeah.
that something happens. So there is room. And
Yeah.
one of the things that kind of came to my mind is cultivating a feedback
culture. I like that. I really, really like that. And any final thoughts on reimagining and rehumanizing the workplace?
I think my final thoughts would be taking a different look at. We often talk about an employee value proposition,
Yes.
and an organization talk. This is our value proposition, and this and that or the other. So I think and this is something that COVID has taught us. Taking and what I call, and one of the things that I see is emerging, an employee-centered value proposition. So what that means is you start with employees. Employees are not homogeneous.
They're definitely not.
For the first time in centuries, we've got so many generations. How many generations do we have? Different generations in within the workplace.
Think about
4 generations. So understand, and their needs are different. So the emphasis should not be so much as what and having a uniform way of having the results. It's understanding what each employee really needs in order for them to do what they need to do.
Do you think that's practical and sustainable?
It is practical and sustainable, and it takes, again, back to leaders. It requires intentional, evolved leadership. And there's a book I read. I think I listened to and read. What's his name again? It'll come back. But the author Adam Grant. Adam Grant was talking
Work
about
life. He's got a podcast as well.
Yes, he's got a podcast. So I really enjoy his podcast. And there was a time and I think there was also an article in The Economist where he was making a distinction between and he said the world of work now needs macro managers, not micro managers. So for him, macro managers was managers and leaders that have such a deep understanding of leading and managing in chaos, being able to look and read the outside world, the context, and interpret it and create some kind of stability or no panic inside of the organization. And how you do that is defining what is needed at this point, what is important in terms of driving whatever the objectives of the organization, and clarifying and getting out of the way and let people do the work, not telling people how they should do it, which is what micromanagers do. They're always looking over your shoulders. No, you're not doing it right. This is how you should do it. Anything else, is not the right way.
Okay. You've actually just answered the first bonus question that I was going to ask you just in the next segment of the podcast. It was about, what book, what video or podcast or even article that you've read or listened to recently that has shifted your perspective about work. Yeah. And I think that might be it, unless if you have another one.
Yes, I think what comes to mind is the book Think Again.
Think Again, okay.
Did you, by Adam Grant.
Okay.
So essentially, I really loved that book. I mean, it was an unputdownable for me. And essentially, what he's speaking, there's a lot of messages, a lot of insights and wisdom in there, but at the heart of it is rethinking, the ability not just to think, but to rethink. And it connects to the adage of, in order for us to learn, we have to unlearn some of the things that have put us here. because in order, what put you here today is not what's going to lead you to there
to
tomorrow.
The next step,
So in there he talks about rethinking. The ability to rethink is a necessity and also an important mindset for leaders and everybody in organizations today.
Think Again by Adam Grant. Okay,
Yeah.
I've noted that. All right. And what does wellness in the workplace look like for you?
Yeah. So wellness is holistic. We tend to, when we talk about wellness, we kind of narrow it down to health, to wellness, to mental wellness, work-life balance. And that is also part of it. But for me, it's simply about a psychological contract between the employer and employees and making it explicit. Because the thing about a psychological contract, more often than not, is implicit. You think, if I do this, then my employer this or the other. So the starting point for me, wellness is making a psychological contract explicit between the employer and the employee, and it includes almost all the things that we spoke about, but also within relevance. There is relevance. I'm big on context.
Yeah.
We're living in a different world now, and context. We've just come out. We're not actually completely out of the economic woes of the pandemic, for example. So part of the responsibility of employers from a wellness point of view is financial wellness.
Yeah.
A lot of people are in debt, particularly junior people, people much lower in the ranks within. People are struggling, are living from paycheck to paycheck. So part of it, the wellness ought to include financial wellness, what it looks like, and we have co-create and the solutions with employees. And I mean, one of the things I like, and I always talk about this, and I don't know what the employer's role might be, but it's sleep.
Yes, please.
Just sleep and rest. I find that people sleep less and less now. And so employees, it's a part of their own wellness is just resting and sleep. And I think the role of the employer is not to pile up employees with way too much work where people carry work home, especially now in the working from home where the boundaries are blurred. So my approach or looking at wellness is more holistic. Financial, mental wellness, sleeping, resting, and just taking care of yourself and doing nothing. I'm big on doing nothing, making an appointment with myself to do nothing.
Okay, I like that. And any parting words you would tell your younger self about being a professional in corporate South Africa?
Three things come to mind that, younger me in corporate, you may be how smart and be how educated, but you know what? The system is bigger than you.
Sure. That's very humbling.
Yeah. You may have the best idea at the moment, and that's the right one. But it's all about timing. You can timing and delivery. So there's something I learned. I love distinctions. I think that's part of being a coach. The difference between compromising and sub-optimize. So I'll tell my younger self to actually sub-optimize more.
What does that mean?
So sub-optimizing tied to the point I made about timing. You may have the best idea, but it might just not, the time might not just be right. So compromising is when, because you're pressured. Sub-optimizing means, but it requires a lot of self-awareness.
Definitely.
The ability to read the room very quickly and say, hey, this is not the right time, and pull back. So sub-optimizing is pulling back for the good of the whole, because you know that if I'm going to say it now, it's just going to be chaotic. And I've been in situations where
That's
in the past,
emotional intelligence.
that it really is emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Where, and unfortunately, some of those things is experience that is the teacher.
That's the teacher. Yeah.
So there are times when I'm like, no, I'm going in, and I've got
They
in,
have to hear me.
They have to hear me now, and it ended up in tears.
Yeah, okay.
It didn't end up well. And
later
later on, I learned, to sub-optimize, hold back, to say, hey, this is not the right time.
And it doesn't mean you're suppressing your voice.
It's not. It does not mean you're suppressing. And next time, when the timing is right and you say it, it lands on fertile soil. And I suppose the last thing is that I would say to my younger self before I became wiser. I said, I don't do politics, organizational politics. Well,
you have to
there's
play
a whole,
the game.
it's, if you don't, as they say, I've got a friend, Neven Postman, usually says, if you don't do politics, politics will do you.
Oof.
But it's more around to what extent, if it's not just about the self, it's similar to the concept of sub-optimizing. So when you do play organizational politics, it's to what end? Is it about, moving us forward, moving this, and what is it founded on? Not doing politics for the sake of, me, all about me kind of thing. So those are the kinds of things that, looking back.
Okay. Definitely noteworthy lessons for myself as well, especially the point about sub-optimizing. But thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, your knowledge, your expertise. Really appreciate your presence today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. And thank you so much for watching or listening. If you are listening via Apple Podcast, Spotify, or Anchor FM, you can also find the podcast on YouTube at Wellness in the Workplace, and also on Instagram at Wellness in the Workplace _. My name is Mbali Mzinyane. Thank you so much. See you on the next episode. Bye-bye.